because he himself is the artist of his life, and he creates it for himself every hour to suit his latest whim. These thoughts aren't unique to Dostoevsky's dreamer who we encounter in White Nights. They populate the minds and hearts of any modern-day romantic. You've probably met this person before, the one living entirely in their imagination while promising you the world. With their words, they paint a future so vivid you almost believe it already happened. They almost seem so selfless and so pure to the unsuspecting eye, qualities that only demand your unquestioning trust. Except that the moment reality enters the picture and asks something real of them, like accountability or a difficult conversation, they are nowhere to be found anymore. I want to use Dostoevsky's dreamer character to scrutinize a wider phenomenon we see increasingly in the world today, the dangers of the idealist, who lives entirely consumed by their own fantasies, especially with social media and dating apps constantly refining what the ideal should be, and AI offering endless ways to explore these fantasies. The loop seems never-ending, and the true cost of these harmless fantasies awaits more than anyone else, the person themselves. The dreamer archetype. The literary giant Fyodor Dostoevsky constructs a brilliantly deluded character who accurately embodies the qualities of the romantic idealist. We meet him in White Nights, where he narrates his brief yet tragic encounter with love following a lifetime of loneliness. He doesn't introduce us to his name, but let's call him the dreamer. To fully understand his reality, we must first understand his world and spend a moment inside his head. The dreamer takes us on one of his regular strolls through the city of St. Petersburg, where he has become intimately acquainted with the faces and routines of passers-by and the elaborate lives they inhabit inside his head, without ever exchanging a single word with any of them. One time he recalls not seeing one of them for a couple of days and missing them so dearly that when they finally crossed paths again, they almost did the unthinkable. The other day, when we had not seen each other for 2 full days and met on the 3rd day, we almost reached for our hats. But thank goodness we came to our senses in time, lowered our hands, and passed each other by in sympathy. He has even struck conversations with the houses of the city, attributing elaborate stories to their lives and imagining them voicing their loud protests whenever their owners decide it is time for a fresh coat of paint or a remodel. Everything around him seems to have a personality and a personal relationship with him. One-sided, of course, but to him it's mutual. In his head, he has constructed an entire world where everyday characters are unwilling, active participants. He's not exactly vicious or stupid, but he is so deeply, unbearably lonely that he has to give meaning to everything around him, big or small, because it's all he has. It's not that he wants to be alone. In fact, he yearns for companionship, the version of it inside his head at least. But whenever a visitor makes an appearance at his home, his slightly unattended to home, the fantasy collapses. He's no longer that eloquent, cordial host he envisions himself to be. His words can hardly find their way out of his mouth, and he stands there awkwardly and shamefully, as though he had just committed a crime within his 4 walls. It's as if he had just been caught not living out the ideals he preaches in his head. You see, his particular proclivity to living inside his head brings with it a sort of idealism around how interactions should unfold. But reality would rarely oblige. And so, now both him and the guest end up feeling uncomfortable. The guest ends up leaving, vowing never to visit again, and the dreamer convinces himself that no one truly understands him, and he is better off by himself. And yet, this self-imposed loneliness is exactly what gives his fantasies their intensity, because in his imagination, nothing can reject him. He has full control over the narrative. It's not that he's oblivious to his condition. On the contrary, he's painfully aware of himself. He knows he's a dreamer and even calls himself so. He rather takes a certain pride in it. He in fact pities the rest of us, those trapped in the sad happenings of reality. To him, people busy with their daily errands, their schedules, their practical affairs, seem almost like tormented creatures of a lesser world, deprived of the magical worlds that exist in the imagination. Reality is simply too dull and disappointing. Because for the dreamer, life only truly begins when the night falls. He comes to life when business finally ends and the annoying obligations of reality take a back seat. That's when his imagination gets to work and he falls in love with people he never even met. He dreams of love so vivid in its torment that it's hard for anyone to believe he hasn't actually experienced it. A new dream is new happiness, a new dose of exquisite, voluptuous poison. Oh, what does real life have to offer him? Note that he talks about himself with the third person pronoun. In my last video, I talked about Kierkegaard's concept of despair. Kierkegaard views it as a sort of deep-seated sickness that comes from a misalignment between the contradicting aspects of the self. For Kierkegaard, every self exists somewhere between two opposing poles, the finite and the infinite, what's concrete and defined and what's possible. Despair happens when one of these extremes overpowers the other, when we lose ourselves in the routine and conformity, doing what the world expects of us and living exclusively within the limits of reality. We fall into what he calls the despair of finitude. But when we escape into imagination and boundless possibility, detached from anything real, we fall into the despair of infinitude. And that's exactly where our dreamer lives, entirely in the infinite. Someone commented on that video that people are happy within their routines and habits. And why does Kierkegaard have to pathologize the normal human condition? But here's the thing, our dreamer is not happy. He is superficially, but he admits to experiencing sobering moments that expose him to just how fleeting and hollow his happiness is and how desperately he longs to experience real life. Because at those moments, it begins to seem that I will never be able to begin living a real life. Because it already seems that I have lost all sense, all feeling for the genuine, the real. Because in the end, I curse myself. Because after my fantastic nights, I am visited by sobering moments that are horrible. Meanwhile, you see how people live. They live in reality. You see that life for them is not forbidden, that their life doesn't vanish like a dream. He feels so helplessly trapped by his monotonous life. Despite being only 26, he feels that life had already passed him by. He realizes that his dreams are merely illusions, yet doesn't know how to live without them. He realizes that even novelty gets old, yet he can't escape it to reality since he hasn't established any real footing in it. So he remains trapped in despair. He wants so badly to escape life's disappointment, yet cannot escape the ultimate disappointment, himself. I suppose this is what many people who resort to escapism experience. At some point, even novelty from social media or dating apps or video games or whatever it may be fades away, and they are forced to confront reality. But upon confronting reality, they realize how alienated from it they have become and how unfamiliar it feels and how much of life has passed by. In that moment, they feel powerless. And that helplessness turns to self-loathing that further alienates them from living. It's far more convenient to escape to a world that demands nothing of you and where you can be the hero of your own choice. I love you, i.e., the idea of you. For a moment, it feels to our dreamer as though not all is lost, because one night, one of his most intoxicating fantasies came to life when he happened to meet Nastinka, a naive, sensitive girl who just happens to be nothing short of a dreamer herself, of her own kind. Not only does she listen to him, she understands. Now imagine what happens when someone who's lived their entire life in their imagination, feeling unbearably lonely, meets someone who makes them feel like they matter. Most people regulate themselves through conversation, through the little exchanges of joy and sorrow with others. But the dreamer never had any of that. His psyche is overflowing with words and emotions he's been rehearsing his whole life. So he erupts and he tells her everything about his lonely walks, his conversations with the houses, his shame, his small joys, the people he fell in love with despite being purely a figment of his imagination. The monologue never stops. Most of all, he tells her how he is a dreamer of the most exquisite kind. She chuckles and admits being guilty of the same. She asks only one thing of him, not to fall in love with her, Surely enough, he agrees enthusiastically. Anything so he doesn't risk losing this precious connection. But something changes in him after that night, because now she is the new subject of his fascination. How she smiles, how she laughs at his jokes, how she validates him every time he shares a piece of his inner world. You have to understand that as a dreamer, he's not seeing her as a separate human being with her own world and desires and unique story. He's seeing a canvas on which he could paint everything he's been missing. A lifetime of repressed desires and needs and longings. He's seeing a flattering reflection of himself, the hero he always imagined himself to be. And he likes what he sees. Because that's what infatuation is. It's never about the other person, but about what their attention touches in you, how it makes you feel desirable. So it is only natural that within the day, he falls in love with her. She tells him about her own romantic tragedy, how she fell for a lodger who was staying at her grandmother's house, and how she went to him confessing. The lodger promised to come back to her in 1 year's time, and now that it's been a year, she's convinced that he's been back and didn't come to see her. As he listened to her story, it's as if he's falling more and more in love with her for the kind of fantasy she embodies. The faithfulness, the waiting, the delicate tears, everything as if taken right out from his imagination. And though he knows that she loves another, it doesn't matter. The idea of her is enough. But here's the thing, his love isn't at all selfless. When she expresses distress over her lodger abandoning her, he insists that she should write him a letter, despite her protests and discomfort at the idea, given that it was she who begged for him when they last saw each other. But our dreamer is not exactly thinking about what would best suit the situation or what would be in her best interest. Her sorrow is making him uncomfortable. It's threatening the lightness and joy that she brought with her. She can no longer pay attention to him. He's not thinking about what she needs. He's thinking about what he needs from her. So he tries to do anything that promises to remove her sadness, only so that her attention is restored. While she's waiting on the response to her letter and oscillating between hope and despair, he couldn't keep his feelings in anymore and explodes in a grand confession. She tells him that she loves him too, and in a way she means it. She does love him, albeit more in a brotherly sense. But when she doesn't get the attention she seeks from her lodger, she tries to convince herself it's romantic love and that they shall be happy. Until suffering, the ultimate unsung romance. The lodger appears, and just like that, she's gone. When he wakes up the next morning, everything around him feels bleak and withering. When Nastinka ran to her lover, his heart shattered. But he doesn't seek revenge or tries to sabotage her happiness. He prides himself on not stooping so low, as if she wasn't a whole independent person with a fully formed life that existed long before him. He quickly reframes the pain into something beautiful. A whole minute of bliss. Is that really so little for the whole of a man's life? He romanticizes his own heartbreak. It's as if he has surrendered to this experience as a sentence on his entire life and immortalized one fleeting imagined joy instead of confronting his reality for what it actually is. Also, she's 17 and he's known her for like 4 days. The dreamer believes himself to be pure and even noble in his suffering. But that's exactly the problem. Romantics like him aren't exactly evil. They may not actively want to deceive others, but they often mistake their fleeting feelings for solid realities. To them, their emotional world feels so intense, so genuine, that it must be real. But what they really fall in love with is the feeling of love itself, not the person who evokes it. The moment that person becomes real with their flaws and their unique story, the fantasy shatters and they vanish. The saddest part is that they often see themselves as victims of love, when in reality, they are victims of their own imagination. I said in the beginning that you cannot possibly trust them. Again, they aren't bad people necessarily. It's more that they are unstable. They simply haven't mastered the subtle skill of existing in reality long enough for anything to take a tangible shape. For a romantic, it's far more attractive to suffer beautifully in a dream of their own making than to live painfully in a world they never had any control over making. And that's exactly what makes them suffer from the deep-seated despair that Kierkegaard warned us about. You can check out this next video where I explore this topic if you are interested.